Knives Sports Adventures here. Today I am doing a review of the new Benchmade Shootout. So I am really excited about this knife. I'm going to take you through some things that I did not like about this knife when I got it, but it has kind of won me over. So let's talk about size and weight first. First, I was not a fan of how light this knife was. It almost feels cheap. It's got that kind of tinky plastic feel. My first reaction when I pulled this knife out of the box was, this feels like 20 bucks. But I think that it's actually, it's actually okay build quality and everything. It's not that it's built from cheap materials. It just had a feel to it that I'm not used to with OTF knives. Another thing I did not like about this knife at first was this sandpaper patch here. This is really, really rough material. It's almost like 80 grit sandpaper. So it feels like it's going to take the skin off your thumb at first. Again, it doesn't. I got used to it. Another thing that I really wasn't sure about at first was the thinness of this blade, right? This is a very thin blade. It's the new CRU-WEAR steel, the CPM CRU-WEAR. It's so thin you can see I can flex this blade with just my two fingers, right? It is not a real stiff blade because it is so thin. They've made it very lightweight. That's what I didn't like about this knife at first. I did kind of get used to it all, and I actually kind of like this knife now. So it has kind of won me over. Let's go ahead and talk about that. So here's a size comparison for you. There's the Benchmade. Here is a Hogue compound. And here's a Microtech, Ultratech. All pretty well the same size. You can see the Hogue and the Benchmade, especially the Benchmade, are deeper this way than the Microtech. All about the same thickness. I like the deeper feel on this knife. I mean, I like my long, slender knives, but in this case, this does fill my hand a little bit better. So I do like that. One thing that I would say about this knife, it does feel like Benchmade has gone a little cheap on some things here. The CF Elite they're charging a lot for, but it feels kind of cheap. I don't feel like they should be advertising that as a super duper premium material when it's basically glass-filled nylon, glass-reinforced nylon. I mean, it's carbon fiber fibers instead of glass, but it's not. It doesn't have the premium feel of something like a G10 or something, and it's not as stiff as the same thickness of G10, despite what their marketing stuff said. This one has some reinforcement on the inside, which you'll see, so that the sides of this are stiff-ish, but you can still feel and see a little bit of flex in them when you squeeze them, which you can't with the Hogue. Partly that's a consequence of Benchmade's decision to only go with 4 bolts, little tiny T6 bolts, as opposed to 6 rather on the Hogue. So there's just not as much holding it together. So what do I like about this knife? Well, these patches here, the scaly patches, they did win me over. So if you're going to use this knife with gloves, that's going to be a real lifesaver because it really does give you a good grip. It didn't bother my hands like I thought it would. So very well done there. The best thing about this knife, though, is the thumb trigger, right? So the Hogue is a good thumb trigger. Microtech is not a great one. You can see the Microtech is kind of very flat. The Hogue has a little bit more vertical distance to it, so it's easier to catch and use. This one's even better. It's very well gemmed. It comes up a long way. It's ramped well. It's easy to catch. You can open it and close it with wet or sweaty hands. Well done, Benchmade. Somebody finally did one of these right. But that's excellent. The other thing that's excellent is the edge holding ability of this knife. So I can confirm that the CRU-WEAR steel does live up to the hype on its steel, at least with a good heat treat, which is what Benchmade has here. My standard slicing test through the dowels, this one did 300 slices through a dowel, which is the most I've ever seen on any production knife, and it was still slicing paper cleanly at the end of the test. So this is an incredibly good edge holding steel. I hope that it is the way it's supposed to be with that heat treat. They definitely heat treated it hard. As long as it's maintained its flexibility, you know, hopefully that thin blade shouldn't be at risk for cracking or breaking or anything. I hope it is, because I really like this knife, and it's definitely hard, so it better be break resistant as well. So overall, really like that as an everyday carry knife. Let's look at the weight here. So one of the reasons that this makes a good carry knife is the weight. So you saw it's about the same size as the other OTF knives, but this is only 2.8 ounces. The Hogue is 3.6, Microtech is 3.5, so this is almost an ounce lighter than comparably sized knives. Benchmade did cheap out a little bit with the blade coating. They gave you the premium steel, but this is just a Cerakote blade. The Hogue is a CPM, or is a PVD rather, coating. Not quite as good as a DLC, which I think this should have been either PVD or DLC rather than the Cerakote for durability. Let's go ahead and get into disassembly. Be careful when you disassemble this knife if you decide to do it yourself, because there are some little tiny springs that really like to come out at high velocity. So I already had this partially assembled because I've been fighting with it to get it reassembled. So I'm going to carefully disassemble it. They've only gone with four bolts, and they're all T6 hardware, so very tiny hardware. The top cover just comes out, and these little springs here on the locks really want to eject themselves. So I'm going to carefully remove those first, rather than letting them go. So what they've done, rather than do an aluminum internal structure or just an aluminum shape on here, is they've gone with a steel plate on the inside of the knife that retains the blade, which is actually pretty cool because it allows them to do a much lighter structure of the knife. There's the other lock with its little tiny spring. So what they've done is they've put a bolt through here, and there's two pegs in this plate which make the knife slide up and down that as it slides. So this serves as the knife rails, and it also is what keeps the knife from having play up and down this way. So you're not relying on the plastic to keep that knife from rotating up and down. You're relying on the steel plate, which is really cool. They skeletonized it, obviously, for lightweight. So I do kind of like the construction of this knife. It's a pretty cool idea. And what it also allows them to do is put the knife directly, the blade directly in the center of this knife, rather than most OTFs being off to the side. So that's a cool ergonomic thing about this knife. Obviously, here's the main spring and lock release plate. There's the glass breaker. This does just lift out of here. I think it's just stuck in there on some lubricant now. It's got a little catch in there that keeps it. There we go. So there's your main springs. It does have dual main springs on this one. So pretty cool knife. I like it a lot. Steel, for once, actually does live up to its billing, and I definitely recommend this if you're into a light OTF knife. Again, I'm not sure, again, on how lightweight and how thin the steel is, that this is actually a true tactical knife like Benchmade bills it, but it is an excellent EDC knife, and I really did end up liking it. So if you can get past kind of that initial feel, it is a knife I would recommend. It does have a really cool new steel on it, and definitely that steel does live up to its edge holding potential. So enjoy all of your knives and keep adventuring.